Hello, and welcome to the 2023 Investor Insights Series. My name is Todd Federman, and I'm the Managing Director of North Coast Ventures. For those of you not familiar with North Coast, we're a Cleveland-based venture firm with over 400 individual investors that backs early-stage, business-to-business, software-as-a-service companies. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for tonight's program, the Center for Health Affairs. The center was the nation's first regional hospital association and today represents 39 healthcare member organizations in Northeast Ohio. The center also includes Champs Group Purchasing and the Essentials Group, which serves more than 20,000 commercial businesses, nonprofits, and healthcare providers across the nation. As a leader in the healthcare ecosystem, they are committed to leveraging the possibilities of artificial intelligence to benefit patients everywhere. Tonight's timely topic is AI, where we are and where we're going. The genie is clearly out of the bottle, and we find ourselves at a crucial turning point with powerful generative AI capabilities now in the hands of startups, scale-ups, and corporate giants alike, not to mention in the hands of billions of individual consumers across the globe. This brings immense opportunity, but also real risks if not stewarded thoughtfully. Over the next hour, we'll have a candid discussion about AI's current realities, future possibilities, and considerations around both risks and rewards. My sincere thanks to our panel, Paul Roetzer, Al-Dhubaib, and Gary Ellis. With that, let's have each panelist briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into what I know will be a fascinating discussion.
Paul, could you please start?
Yeah, Paul Roetzer, founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute. I founded the Institute in 2016. Started researching AI in around 2011, 2012, trying to figure out the impact it would have on business and marketing in particular. And I had a marketing agency, sold that in 2021. And I've really just been focused on trying to make AI approachable and actionable through our institute with events and courses and content.
Terrific. Cal?
Everyone, good to be here. Al-Dhubaib, I'm the founder of a company called Pandata. I'm a data scientist by training, and Pandata helps organizations design and build machine learning and AI solutions. We focus on high-risk environments. Particularly, we work with quite a few health systems and health technology providers, and I also started in around 2016. Really excited to dive into how things have been transforming over the past few years.
Great. Gary, bring us home.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everyone. I'm Gary Ellis, founder and CEO of Remesh. We've been around for nearly a decade going after the insight space, specifically how do you understand audiences in their own words at scale. We've been using machine learning and natural language processing for a long time and are very excited to be leading into the kind of that next foray of AI technology.
Well, thanks, everyone, and let's dive in. Paul, the first question isn't exactly a question, but it is for you. And what I'm hoping you could do is just react to a perspective that I know I have, and I suspect many others have as well, and that is that about a year ago, I was meaningfully more confident in my understanding of the AI landscape than I am today. For context, North Coast has been investing in AI companies for years. These are fintech, health tech, insurtech type companies that are using AI to harness large data sets and generate new insights and drive new capabilities. And many of these are good, successful, growing companies. And as a result, I think I felt pretty confident about the landscape of where things were headed. But generative AI tools becoming widely available just last fall have really resulted in the AI world being turned on its head. The types of tools and capabilities that were accessible only to a small number of technologists are now in the hands of billions of lay people and being integrated into many mainstream products. As a result, AI is generating massive amounts of text, images, videos, and it is performing analysis and writing software in a way that's never been done before. These developments are proceeding at an absolutely exponential pace, and Paul, although none of us have a crystal ball, you may be the closest to having one with your work with the Marketing AI Institute. So perhaps you can help us to understand where we are today and where you think we're going, at least in the near term.
Yeah, I think the way you explained it is really appropriate. Up until largely November of 2022, AI was commonly being used in businesses. As Gary said, Remesh was using it. It's it was machine learning applications, basically, was what people were doing largely. And it was about making predictions on data sets. It's the kind of things Cal was doing consulting work on. And so organizations have been using forms of artificial intelligence for decades. And the field itself goes back to like the 1950s. So it's not new. But in 2022, in spring, we had image generation tools emerge, DALL-E 2, Midjourney. And then in the fall, and particularly November 30th of last year is when ChatGPT came out. And what it did was democratized access to these tools. Anyone could now go in and try them for free and have that wow factor immediately. And so you had business leaders, government leaders, university leaders, everyone all of a sudden scrambling at the same time to actually understand what is artificial intelligence and what is this technology going to do to the future of work and business.
Thanks, Paul. Cal, I'm hoping you can help us wrap our heads around just how fast the game here is changing. Big numbers and exponential growth is something that's very hard for most of us to comprehend. As a simple example, if you fold a piece of paper in half, it doubles the thickness of the previously flat piece of paper. If you could fold it 10 times, you'd have something that was a couple inches thick. And theoretically, if you could fold it 10 more times, you'd have something that was 50 miles tall. Another 10 times, and it goes to the sun. So when we hear about how quickly AI is improving and the exponential rate of growth around these capabilities, what does that mean for us in just a couple years?
For sure, and I'll pick off where Paul left off, and a big thing to note is that all of the things that we've been doing so far, the so-called boring machine learning and AI applications that have been working behind the scenes at enterprises, that's not going away. That's still in use, and in fact, a large number of problems still depend on that. Where we're seeing this exponential growth is with respect to the field of generative AI and our ability to leverage larger and larger data sets. And so, Paul mentioned this. AI started in the 50s. If you were excited about it then, you were excited about the research, right? Can we find a pixel? Is it green or is it blue? We weren't really doing anything super exciting with it. And then in the 2000s, we started to be able to solve problems. Can we predict when a customer's leaving? Can we predict, when a machine's going to fail? And then 2015 through 2020 started to really get exciting. We could represent language and images at scale and be able to do useful things with it. And then we had the emergence of these language models. And the very earliest forms of GPT-2 were best suited, right, to create really crappy jokes. And we still couldn't see the business value around them. And then over the last, just since ChatGPT hit the public domain, we've seen language model after language model and new capabilities introduced at larger and larger scales. And the next frontier of this is multimodal, right? Being able to ask a language model, why is this image interesting? Why is this funny? We're getting to the point where we can generate videos, edit videos. There's some really amazing applications out there. And this stuff is moving so fast, it's even hard for data scientists to wrap their heads around best practice.
Well, Gary, as Paul and Cal mentioned, the inflection point of ChatGPT last November and other large language models really changed the game. Since then, what has changed for Remesh in terms of the opportunities and the concerns for how you engage with these kinds of large language models?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I really look at it is this technology is a new digital building block. It unlocks a lot of capabilities that we didn't really think were possible, or at least not on the near horizon, but things we've always wanted to be able to do to drive efficiency within our product. And to Cal's point, our core technology isn't going anywhere, right? It's still delivering value to our clients, but now we start to wrap around this technology and augment it and make it more accessible and make it faster and easier to use and understand. And it's an accelerant. And what that should do is make everyone a little bit more efficient, drive adoption, and create that feedback loop where now we're generating even more data, and that drives even more increased efficiency. So, a lot has changed since November, but at the same time, the core of our business and the core of a lot of businesses haven't yet. And it'll be really interesting to see if we see more of a convergence as everyone's starting to play with larger and larger data sets and seeing how those data sets overlap and kind of build on each other.
Yeah. And can you tell us for a moment about how Remesh is working with OpenAI and just how the language model and the product that Remesh has had out for the last 5+ years are now integrated and working together?
Yeah, so we've got both a formal and informal relationship with OpenAI's Chat GPT and with Google's Bard. And I think you have to have both of those relationships. On the formal side, you have to have the right governance in place. Security and privacy matter a ton, especially when you're servicing enterprise clients like we are. And then we have an informal relationship because, to everyone's point, this stuff is moving very, very quickly, and iterations are changing on a monthly basis. And yes, you have access to old APIs, but they sunset those. So you need to be working with the researchers at those organizations in order to stay ahead of the curve and make sure that you're working with them. They want partners, right? This is a new technology, new material for us to wield. And we're some of the people who are wielding that into client value. So right now we have it mostly focused on summarization versus generalization, although we're very quickly, rapidly building more of the generative side as well. And I don't know how much you want me to get into the details, but the end-to-end workflow for qualitative research isn't simple, right? This is a very large industry with a lot of experienced researchers, experts, professionals. And what we believe we can do is start to automate more and more of the mundane work that they do so they can focus on kind of the penultimate thought processes that go into the end results and the insights for these organizations. So I can obviously provide more detail, but I think soup to nuts, end to end, it's just about driving efficiency for professionals. And the fact that you can do that through technology for professionals instead of for lay people is the biggest change that I've seen.
So, Paul, a few weeks ago, your team wrapped up the MACON Marketing AI Conference, sold out. 700 people came to Cleveland. It's a real focus of AI for marketers. You had just a star-studded cast of AI and MarTech experts. Give us a sense of the major takeaways.
I think that there's a emerging importance being given to responsible AI. I think Cal probably saw that. I'm sure Cal talked about that in his session. Ethan Malik, we talked about it. Cassie Kazakov from Google. Olivia Gamble in our closing keynote was ethics in AI. So there were some talks dedicated to responsible AI, but it seemed to just emerge out of almost every talk that was being given. And I think that at least the community we're building, there's definitely this emerging focus in that area. But I think the other thing that started to become very clear is we're so early in the adoption. And while the technology is accelerating at this exponential pace, adoption rates are definitely higher and rising quickly. Most enterprises are still trying to solve for what pilot projects to focus on to start. There's very little structure in terms of talent. There's minimal evolution yet of the tech stacks. So I think that generative AI as a discipline or an area of focus is so new that we don't really have a lot of case studies about how to do this the right way. Because if you think about ChatGPT coming out end of November, then we have the holidays, basically organizations in around late January, early February actually started to figure out, what does this mean? How does this affect our talent, our tech, our strategies? And so here we sit, summer 2023, and I've talked with a lot of very large enterprises who still are at the starting point in terms of what they're going to do about this. So that was probably one of the other big takeaways for me, is it's so early, even though the tech is moving so fast. But in a positive light, people are trying to figure out how to do this the right way in a human-centered approach from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I just want to build off of that. I mean, it is, with every other major technological revolution, we've had at least 5 to 10 years to get used to this being here. Think about the introduction of mobile, right? And it's it's going to come. Get ready for it. Get ready to shift your advertising. It's here. And you could have laggards, but it still didn't kill their business. And right now what we're seeing is the technology is moving faster and evolving faster than humans can adapt to it.
No, it is fascinating, and in some ways humans are aware of it, right? Because it's ChatGPT, which we're all using on a consumer basis, but in many cases it's embedded in other software platforms that people may or may not be engaged with. And I guess, Paul, to your point on the corporates and the extent to which they're just at the starting point, I know several large companies that have actually banned it at the firewall level because they haven't gotten around the risks yet, right? So they're behind the starting line for sure.
I'm still getting calls from heads of school systems that don't have policies in place yet for the start of the school year. Don't even have a point of view on it. Haven't guided students if they're allowed to use the technology. Haven't advised parents yet whether or not it's cheating if their kids use it. So as a parent of two primary school children, I have no idea if I'm allowed to even teach them how to use it or have ChatGPT assist in the homework as of how their work's going to go in the future. So these are the kinds of challenges we're facing, is not just in your business. If you're an employee using ChatGPT and not sure if you're allowed, that's happening all over the place. People are using these systems and is not even talking about it because there's no policy. They're getting their work done more efficiently, but they're not even sure they're allowed to be doing it. So it's amazing actually how few companies have clear policies on this stuff yet, other than just shutting it off if that's the case.
Cal, traditionally AI required vast amounts of data to train the models. And with Gen AI, there's the potential to train not just through data, but through more targeted use case, process flows, and data sets. So give us your perspective, and is the value of data being diminished in some way, or is it more complementary to these other use cases? And how should organizations, large and small, think about this new reality around data?
It's never been more valuable. In fact, one of the interesting consequences of this whole generative AI revolution is, oh, crap, we need to curate our data well if we want to structure it in a way that we can build an enterprise application that leverages a language model, right? And there's two ways of approaching this. We're going to use GPT-4. We're going to use Llama 2, for example, or any other insert name of model. And even then, you still have to kind of curate your data because you can't feed it all into the language model all at once. And that requires careful structuring. And that also requires data governance. And so for years, enterprises have been saying, oh, we're gonna get to it. Or, oh, it's just going to slow us down, or there's no point in doing this. And so this current revolution is actually making data more valuable. And one of the interesting things is it's no longer necessarily data equals an asset. It's actually, in some cases, data equals liability. And we can look to some of the examples where language models have leaked proprietary information. So in my perspective, the governance of data has actually gotten more valuable than the data itself.
Excellent.
If I can build off that slightly, I agree with everything that Cal just said. I don't think the value of data has necessarily changed, but now organizations who have been sitting on troves of data, largely unstructured and siloed, are now understanding that if they actually structure it properly, they can finally leverage it for insight and actual ROI. So I think that's the big change here, is now data is actually understood to be as valuable as it can be, or now we can extract the value from it, whereas before it was hard enough that most organizations didn't put in the time or effort, or they didn't see the ROI to put in the time or effort.
Yeah.
Gary, Remesh's customers are a who's who of the Fortune 500, with an emphasis on consumer packaged goods companies and these very large consultancies. Have you seen corporate appetite and their approach to AI evolve over the past 9 months?
I would actually say, so there's almost two questions there. One is the approach to AI, and one is data security, privacy, compliance, that side of the house. And that's been changing over the past 3 to 5 years. We're seeing a lot more scrutiny, a lot more resources dedicated on the enterprise sides to make sure they're in compliance with a lot of the new regulation that's come through. It's somewhat similar on the AI side to everyone's earlier points. Big companies have been on the fringes of, if not fully adopting, different AI solutions for a very, very long time. I think the biggest difference now is the old approach was walled garden. All of our data lives here. We do implementations that allow us to use machine learning to be somewhat predictive in our supply chain or whatever application is most beneficial for the organization. What's going on now is the requests from folks like OpenAI or Bard, and it's more about knocking down those walled gardens and where your data lives and kind of what that ecosystem kind of looks like. There's a commoditization of data that obviously these large language models have already been able to absorb and understand. And then you've got the private data on top of it. And what organizations are trying to figure out is how do they integrate their private data on top of the large language models so they can get the value of the large language models, but not expose themselves to the risk of having that data kind of being pushed beyond their walled gardens. And it's a really challenging balance for these organizations to get right, because some of the relationships with the large language model companies have them having the access to your data and others don't. So there does need to be a lot of scrutiny by these organizations to protect themselves. But they also are recognizing the opportunity here, so they're trying to lean in. So there's polarizing forces here at play, and Some organizations are moving faster than others, and it's along the verticals that you'd expect, right? The more conservative organizations or the more conservative verticals have to be a little bit more disciplined and a little bit slower to adopt it, but everyone is moving in the direction of adopting these technologies.
Well, Paul, let's go back to you. As we've heard, the availability and adoption of generative AI has just exploded over the past year. Could you share some real-world examples of how AI has transformed marketing capabilities and strategies that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter the size of the company now because a lot of these tools are so accessible and affordable. Like, for example, Descript is one we use for podcasting and our webinars, and I think it's like $15 a month per user, and it eliminated the need for us to have an outside production team for our podcast. We could do all the production and editing ourselves. We can cut it up into a bunch of clips and videos for YouTube. Which helps with the production of content. So those kinds of tools, a Runway ML, which is like $30 a month, and I have video and image capabilities that we didn't have before. You can obviously go into GPT-4 with $20 a month for the Chat GPT Plus plan, and do all kinds of things: strategy, summarization, ideation. Obviously, writing and editing, improving content. All of these things are accessible to basically anyone, any size company. And many of them have free versions. So I think that what we're seeing is organizations, marketers, business leaders realizing that AI can be used to intelligently automate repetitive tasks. It can be used to enhance creativity, drive smarter decision making, and solve problems in entirely new ways. And sometimes all it takes is knowing how to prompt a AI writing tool or a language model to get the assistance that might have cost you thousands of dollars previously. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm seeing. And again, whether it's dental practices, like my buddy is a dentist, and we've used GPT-4 to help build some business strategies for him, to writing video scripts for opening videos for conferences. It's just the use cases are endless once you realize what the AI is capable of doing, and it doesn't matter really what your budget is or size of company. And in some cases, you don't even need a ton of data for these generative AI capabilities. You can just start tomorrow doing it. And I think that's one of the big shifts that's happened. Is as critical as data is, to Cal's point, it's more critical than ever. There are more use cases than ever, though, that don't require you to have a bunch of data structured in a proper way to use it. It's just going in and giving a prompt and getting an output. And so that's really what keeps changing and making it so accessible to everyone now.
And I'll add, Paul, that there's the two sides of it, right? There's the user side of it, and we've dropped the barriers. You can now go straight to the well. Right? Yeah. You can interface with these language models and do a lot of useful things with them. Then there's the build side of it. And that's also equally exciting because you can use these, and Gary, you mentioned this earlier, it's a new set of building blocks, right? We can now design and build things we couldn't have done in the past or would have taken significantly more effort to build. So that's another kind of avenue that startups are starting to pursue.
Cal, with AI, even more of our personal and business data is in the cloud, as if it was possible to have more. What should companies know about security and IP issues around AI? Who owns what at the end of the day, and what are the risks?
So I'll start with AI more generally, and then we'll zoom in on generative AI. AI has always been somewhat problematic. That's been my perspective for many years. And it's by definition. It's software that recognizes patterns and reacts to it. We're talking about models. Models, by definition, are wrong some amount of the time, but they're still useful, right? So when we go to a website and we click a button, we want that button to do the same thing every time, and yet we need to build enterprise applications around this. So AI can break in ways we can't anticipate, and that's its fundamental flaw. So we've had issues historically with AI when being trained on certain data sets, being biased towards certain groups or demographics. At best, its errors can be comical. At worst, it can create serious poor decision-making for enterprises and even discriminate against individuals. And so it used to be bias and ethical AI and responsible AI was kind of this esoteric academic practice. And to Paul's point earlier in the conversation, it's now mainstream. Enterprises building machine learning and AI technology have to have that as part of the conversation. So AI has been somewhat problematic for some time. Now let's zoom in on generative AI. We have a whole host of new issues, including hallucination, which is something we've all pretty much experienced. It's where the AI makes things up. And guess what? When you want the AI to write a poem or a script for a movie or a podcast that doesn't yet exist, you want it to hallucinate. You want it to make things up. But in some cases where it responds confidently, here are your citations, and none of the citations are real or correct, but they look like they are. That's when it gets problematic. Then we have issues with IP. When we're generating new images, new text, how much of that has been directly contributed to by some underlying source, right? Do we credit the original author? Are we approaching plagiarism? There's a lot of issues that we need to get to clarity on that front. And then there's other issues as far as security risks that are new to generative AI, one of which is prompt poisoning. So presumably, let's imagine a situation where you have an AI assistant that works within your inbox, and somebody embeds in the header of your email hidden instructions that tell this assistant to do certain things. And it's encoded in such a way where it says things like forward the last 10 emails, delete any trace of having done this. And so we have these new security problems that are coming with generative AI that we need to be mindful of.
Terrific.
Is it? It didn't feel terrific, Todd. I'm like thinking about the email thing now. It's like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh,
Cal.
I'm sorry, Paul. I promise not to go down rabbit holes.
Oh man. All right. I'm
I hear
good.
you. I'll reserve judgment for this moment, but
So let me just add, right? I'm cautiously optimistic about the field of AI. And when we talk about this whole, we're starting to get into, are there jobs being lost? And I think there's many more jobs being created. There are so many new problems that we need to solve.
no, absolutely. And although I think the notion of AI and the workforce is probably a different conversation, it's a fascinating conversation. And the level of change we're seeing already within our portfolio is different. And if we can, I'll circle back to that in just a bit. But let's go more narrow for a moment. And Gary, you've had this experience with Remesh. You've built a lot of homegrown AI. You've integrated with others, including OpenAI. What advice do you have for startups as they consider integrating AI directly into their products or services for the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say at this point, you need to do it, but you can't do it blindly. You need somebody on your team who is at least trying to become as well-versed as we can in this ever-changing, fast-moving field. To Cal's point, there's ways in which this can be implemented and have irrevocably dangerous effects on your clients. You need to know what you're getting into, but at the same time, if you're not adapting this digital building block, as I said before, you're not going to have the best product, right? Technology is all about the promise of delivering better, faster, cheaper. And without a doubt, these language models are going to allow applications to be more accessible, to be more efficient, to help push businesses along. So if you're not able to leverage them properly, you will have an inferior product. So I think the general message is you've got to figure out a way to do this responsibly. But you also have to note that when you're working with these large clients, you're going to trigger a lot of security and compliance checks, and you better have the right answers. You better be doing it the right way, or you're going to have a really, really hard time with the actual implementation and leveraging of the technology. So it's a double-edged sword here.
Paul, you talk with corporate leaders every day. What are some of the misconceptions about AI that you hear from them?
Well, I think that most of them woke up to AI when ChatGPT emerged. And so the first flaw is that they think that that's AI, that that's it, that they had to solve for ChatGPT. And if they did that, then they had their, AI roadmap. And so that's the first problem, is just a complete lack of understanding about what it actually is. Cal talked a little bit about some of the features or flaws of language models. If you ask most CEOs to explain a language model to you, it's not going to go well. So they have a misunderstanding of the core technology. And you don't need a computer science degree to know this stuff. I was a journalism grad. I came out of journalism school, liberal arts guy, built a marketing agency. Like, I'm not a computer scientist, data scientist, machine learning engineer. I just studied the space over a long period of time and learned it, and then tried to make it understandable to other people. And so my general feeling is you can develop a baseline understanding of what AI is and what it's capable of in a day. Like, if you read the right book or take the right online course, or have the right conversations, you can get the fundamentals down, especially if you're a leader of a business. And you have to have those, like Gary was saying about the idea that you need people within the companies who understand AI to be guiding this. You can't just throw this to someone who's 25 years old, not a school, and likes TikTok, so you think they can figure out the tech thing like we did with social media back in the day. That's not going to work this time. We need people who want to invest their time and energy to understand what it is, what it's capable of, and where it's going. Because the innovation we've seen in the last year or two is going to be nothing like what we see over the next year or two. It's only going to accelerate more, and the change is going to get more and more disruptive. And so that's the biggest flaw I see, is just a lack of understanding of the significance of the moment we find ourselves in and what it's going to do to companies, to knowledge work, to educational systems, to governments, to society. People just don't realize it. Like, they're trying to solve for like tool sets and missing the bigger picture here. And so that's always been my thing, is with our institute, it's like, as soon as I can get people to understand like use cases and technologies and fundamentals, then we can get them to the real conversations around ethics and responsible AI and impact on governments and society and things like that, because that's the stuff I really care about. And we just don't have enough of an educated base yet to move society in that direction fast enough.
Cal, AI is impacting every single part of the economy, and most of us know that the largest individual part of the U.S. economy is healthcare. Given how many healthcare systems that you work with, what are you seeing adopted, and what are the most significant opportunities right in front of us with healthcare and AI?
So the most exciting, I would say, are different from the most valuable today. So some of the most exciting, I'll start there, have to do with drug discovery, medical imaging, and these are very, very niche and narrow use cases. On the drug discovery front, right, we now have tools that can help us model how proteins fold in 3D space and discover new potential candidate drugs quicker, faster, safer than we've ever been able to before. On the medical imaging front, and most AI use cases, by the way, they're narrow in scope. We can now detect artifacts, streamline workflows, but here's the big secret. Here's the elephant in the room. The most widely adopted and invested in applications in healthcare have to deal with operational efficiencies. Can we predict who's not going to show up? Can we help coach a patient through adherence with medication? Can we predict who is most at risk of being readmitted? And these are problems that we've been studying for quite some time, and we just have fancier, more competent models that we can use at our disposal, and health systems are finally getting their act together around their data. So while there's a lot of new, exciting stuff that we're unlocking with the world of generative AI, there's a lot of problems and efficiencies to be gained from these problems that we haven't been able to solve in the past. So we're still playing catch up. And then as far as generative and language models go, I just attended HIMSS earlier this year, and it's one of the largest health tech conferences in the world. And of course, medical record companies there were showcasing. Nuance there was showcasing the use of AI to take a transcription of a doctor-patient interaction and turn it into a set of clinical notes. And oh my gosh, to Paul's point earlier, we've yet to unlock what's the governance around this. Who assumes the liability? What if something incorrect is placed into the patient record? Right? Who's at fault for that? So we've proven that we can build it, but we don't yet know how we're going to use it and what governance structure we need around it.
Gary, as someone that is leading and managing a high-growth startup team, how do you foresee AI impacting the HR needs of startups? As adoption of AI further accelerates and impacts some of these functional areas more than others, how might the startup team of the future look different than it does today?
Potentially. I don't think we fully actually can answer that question at this point in the life cycle of generative AI and large language models. For sure, we've seen changes within our organization, but not in terms of full shifts in speciality, but people able to do their jobs more efficiently. And, we did our due diligence and our homework, and we released an internal policy on using ChatGPT. We've got our kind of dedicated champions internally who have taught how to do prompts properly, how to get around hallucinations, or how to understand where hallucinations pop up and what to do about them. But what we're really looking at for the life cycle of our employee is, how do you drive more efficiency? So it's the ability to do more with less. And that doesn't mean that we should hire less people. It means that we should be able to watch output increase. And right, again, that gets back to the promise of technology, the ability to do more with less resources. So, we've got Copilot for GitHub. I believe I've got that name right. And the idea there is that it'll increase the efficiency of our engineering team pretty significantly. Almost all of the products that we use on the product side are adapting large language models as well. So our product team has become more efficient. Our sales team is able to use large language models to be a little bit better with their outbound efforts. CS was able to use large language models for some support documentation, and it doesn't replace them. You still need the humans in the room, but they're able to get a head start on a lot of their work. So I see a significant amount of change to the startup landscape. It's easier to move faster, but as we've kind of discussed in this conversation, there's risks associated with it. You've got to make sure you've got the right governance in place. And even for us, we're very careful about the data that we expose to it. We expose client data, but only very specifically through our application with the right process in place. And then internally, when we're building out things, we've got different rules for what type of process or what type of data that you're allowed to push into the system. So it'll likely change the competitive landscape. It'll allow a lot of companies to show up and be competitive, especially if other companies are not adapting the technology as efficiently and as quickly. But I also have seen more of a convergence on where companies are going. The possibilities with data are all now really accessible to a large amount of organizations who've always wanted to move into that kind of data landscape, but haven't had the resources or ability to. So it's a great equalizer at the same time.
Terrific. And as far as how this comes to life, Paul, I want to bring you into this part of the conversation, because at MACON, there was a really interesting panel of from Insight Venture Partners, a large, successful growth equity, private equity fund, and a partner who was very active with AI companies, and 3 of his portfolio companies, including Wright, was there. And it was really interesting to hear some of the case studies, some of it which I think alludes to what Gary mentioned of how different parts of an organization will now use these tools. But in particular, it also touched with one of the use cases mentioned on the medical side, where one of the use cases was for a dialysis center. They were now taking this 50-page technical comprehensive manual for how to manage dialysis and feeding it into the LLM to quickly give a 2-page overview so that individuals could actually take that home and do work for them at home. So something that would have required significant brain power, horsepower, the kind of person who can read and comprehend technical medical literature and then make it understandable, is now done in 20 seconds. And perhaps that's not the final version, but it sounded like the first version was awfully good. So I wonder if you might talk to just how some of these leading companies are putting products in place that are having an impact today.
Yeah, I mean, the way we think about business right now is you can build a smarter version of any company. So regardless of what industry you're in, if you look at that industry and say, where are the inefficiencies, where are the opportunities for intelligent automation, where are the opportunities to be more creative, drive better decisions, and you almost go down to a first principles approach and say, if we were building this company from the ground up today, how would we do that? How would we make this look different? So, if I apply this line of thinking to our institute business, we're a media company that creates a bunch of content and builds an audience. We're an event company that runs conferences and online summits. We're an education company that does online courses. So I look at that and say, okay, how can I infuse AI into different aspects of these business in these different areas to drive a more intelligent organization, a more efficient organization? And so in our case, we specifically look at content creation. That is where the majority of our work on the media side goes. We have a podcast, we have a newsletter, published about a dozen blueprints on AI in different areas of marketing. We do webinars, we do blog posts, we do YouTube videos. There's all these things, and we have a team of 5, and that's the entire organization is 5. We have 2 people involved really with the content creation side, and 1 person in particular who does the majority of that work. So when you look at the output of our team, it is the output you would expect. There's 10 content marketers working at the company, and there's not. It's me and Mike doing a podcast that we turn into all this other content through all these different tools. And by using all these AI tools, what it does is it frees us up to also be more human in how we're building the company. So Kathy, our chief growth officer, rather than spending 20 hours on every podcast episode, uses a collection of AI tools, gets that time down to maybe 6-7 hours, and then redistributes that time to build one-on-one relationships, to grow a community, things like that. So what we're seeing in our own business and different enterprises is you look at the business and you look at all the things you already do, look at all the problems you're trying to solve, and you say, how can we do these in a smarter way? And then how can we take that time and redistribute it to, as Gary's saying, increase output or production in other areas, things that aren't getting done? How do we go do those? So you redistribute those resources, or you just drive that efficiency and you just need fewer people as you grow. So for me, building a company, I have the luxury of not having an existing legacy team that I have to shift all those resources and reskill people. We're just saying, let's just build it smarter and more efficient from the ground up. So rather than being a team of 15 or 20 right now, we're a team of 5. And we're functioning as though we were a team of 15 or 20 probably. And I think that's what the future of business looks like. It's just smaller, more dynamic teams that get way more done, and in a lot of ways more creatively and higher performing than you would had you not had these tools at your disposal.
Cal, I asked you about health systems previously. More broadly, though, when you work with clients, what are some of the big challenges involved in developing enterprise scale generative AI tools? Do you have any advice for these types of large institutions?
So I'll start with this notion of AI literacy. And as recently as a couple of years ago, Harvard Business Review did a study or showcased a study where fewer than 25% of the workforce was actually even data literate. So we still have challenges understanding data, and now we're leapfrogging to how do we deal with AI? When can we trust it? What privacy issues should we all be aware of? So start with AI literacy. That is the fundamental skill that needs to be cultivated at every level across an organization. That being said, I want to share a story. I was having a conversation with an individual about their startup sales team, and they had a series of tools that they were using to help them prospect folks on LinkedIn, facilitate intro conversations, actually coach the sales development representatives through the sales process or through the call. And they were able to double the amount of leads that their sales SDRs were able to handle. And what ended up happening is, yeah, in theory, you could do more with less, but they started burning out. So we're reaching a point where technology is allowing us to cram more and more in, or conversely, we can take a page out of Paul's book. And we can say, what does work look like reimagined? What does happen when we put more emphasis back on human relations? And how do we use that to create more value? So I would encourage enterprises not only to cultivate and invest in AI literacy, but really think about what does the future of workforce look like? And how do we value time?
Gary, you talk with a number of other startups and VCs regularly. What's your advice to these AI-oriented startups seeking funding? Are there certain elements of their businesses that you think they should be emphasizing or focusing on to attract tech investment in this current environment?
Yeah, I've always been a proponent of really the basics of understanding your company, understanding why you can solve the problems that you're aiming to solve, what is unique about the way in which you're solving it, or what's your special sauce, and what value does that create? And yes, having AI across your organization should make all of those things better and give you a higher probability of being successful. But I don't like the, hey, now I'm generative AI, and like at the beginning of COVID, everyone's like, cool, we're going to take so much advantage of COVID and we'll definitely pitch ourselves as the part of the new COVID wave. I was like, no, that's just a phase, right? You to build a sustainable long-term business, you have to have a real value prop and you have to know how to solve that. So yes, if you're not leaning into AI, as we've been discussing, you're probably not able to build a differentiated, valuable problem-solving business. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything has fundamentally changed in terms of how you need to show up and raise capital. You have to be able to justify the fact that you as a founder have a unique point of view and perspective on a really valuable problem. You're making progress towards solving it. And if you're at the early stages, it can be theoretical. Obviously, the more KPIs and real proof points you can use of solving those problems for customers, the better. And then what's the value of actually solving that problem? And as you project it forward, how does that problem evolve? How does it fit into the future landscape? But I think that's held true for almost as long as VC's been around.
I love that, Gary. And like if I hear somebody say we're going to solve for X with AI, the first question I want to know is why weren't you using AI before, right? If all of a sudden you're just excited about it because of the hype and you don't have a solid reason for why AI for that particular problem, red flags go up.
Paul, let's do one last question before the lightning round here. At the Macon conference a couple weeks ago, one of the keynote speakers said that if the future of AI hasn't kept you up at least 3 nights, you're not paying enough attention. I feel like I'm paying attention. I've certainly had some of those late nights thinking through the implications of AI. So maybe you can help talk me off the ledge here. How are we as a technology community and a society going to experience this and eventually look back on this moment in time for us and for history in terms of how AI has emerged over these past several months?
Yeah, it's a really big question. I spend my life trying to think about the next like 5 days, maybe 5 months. I generally avoid the 5 years because I realize I just have no idea, nor do I think anyone really does, of what 5 years, 10 years from now really looks like. I think that we'll look back at this period though as the spark of the change, not the change itself. I think that what we're experiencing, while disruptive and really hard to conceptualize because it is an exponential growth phase, and that's hard for our minds to comprehend, I don't think we've even begun to feel the real shift that is going to occur in business and in knowledge work, in education. I think over the coming years, we're going to experience change on par with what we've felt the last 50 years. I really think it's going to be completely transformational. And so I think that these are the early starts of it. You know, generative AI emerging, the access to DALL-E 2 and image generation tech, the access to writing tech, the access to those multimodal models that Cal's talking about. Sometime in the next 6 months, probably wider accessibility of AI agents that can take actions on your behalf rather than just giving you an itinerary to Italy. They can book your rooms and book your flights and do these things where we have personal assistants. And there's just a lot of things coming that are already existing within AI research labs and in testing. These aren't even like leaps forward. And just those alone are going to change things so dramatically. And that's just the stuff we know about. What the last 5 years has taught us is there's stuff in these AI research labs that we don't know about yet that we know is coming, and that usually we're just not ready for it as a society. And I think there's going to be a lot of those moments where we just weren't ready. And I think we're going to have to get comfortable with the idea that we're not ever really going to be prepared in the years ahead about what's going to happen. And people have to get comfortable with being dynamic in their business and their careers. Okay,
lightning round here. First question. What's something interesting on the AI front that you've learned in the past 30 days?
I get to go first on that one. The South Park research paper was kind of nuts to me. So there's a company called Fable. They built something called the simulation, which may have been taken down by now. I think they were proactive in the lawsuit that was probably heading their way over IP rights to South Park stuff. So they took everything offline 2 days ago, or like earlier last week. But what it was they trained it on a bunch of characters and episodes and scenes in South Park. And they built a system where you could give it a prompt and it would create a 20-minute episode of the entire thing. And it took like 3 hours for the machine to build the whole thing. But character development, voices, music, all of it. It was all AI generated. So they're trying to build TV shows on demand in essence, so that if you loved, let's say in theory, if you loved Friends, and whoever owns the IP to Friends could license it to an AI company that I could build on-demand episodes of Friends for whatever scenario I wanted to have happen. And AI would just spin this thing up, and I could just watch infinite episodes of Friends or infinite episodes of my favorite novels, or reading my favorite novel. So this idea of content on demand generated by AI is a very real thing that may change the way we consume entertainment in the not too distant future. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's terrifying, but it's fascinating.
Well, the 10,000 writers that are currently on strike in Hollywood right now are certainly thinking about
timing
this.
Wasn't very I did some work in PR in my early days. I wouldn't say that they played their card at the right time. It was a little bit of a sore subject when they chose to release that. Yeah.
All right. Cal, last 30 days, what do you have?
Oh my gosh, tough act to follow, but some of the advances on the multimodal front, so connecting image and text and understanding, and Meta just produced a really cool paper and showcase that if you connect instructions to a robot, like try to navigate to this point along with reinforcement from imagery, that you get these emergent behaviors where you're able to actually learn how to navigate, or these physical robots learn how to navigate more effectively. And it's just showing the power of connecting language with vision, right? So very excited to see what that means in terms of more practical applications.
Gary?
I'm going to take the question in a slightly different direction. I've been spending the last more than 30 days, but meeting with a lot of our largest clients, enterprises at the highest levels. And what has surprised me is the lack of preparedness and understanding for how these technologies are going to disrupt their businesses. And I mean that with absolutely no disrespect to any of the leaders. This stuff is moving very, very quickly. And these organizations are not used to being able to adjust and adopt that quickly. And that doesn't even really get into some of the conversations that we've had with governments and how much they're lagging behind on the regulation side. So that's been the thing that's been on my mind as of recently.
What is an AI company or capability that's not widely known but should be?
I was experimenting with Anthropic's Claude 2. So Anthropic is a major language model company. The CEO is the former VP of science, I think, at OpenAI, or one of the executives at OpenAI, left and started Anthropic. They've raised a bunch of money. Claude 2 is extremely impressive. I think it's free to test it out. The main differentiator is you can give it 100,000 tokens of context in a prompt, which is equivalent to about 75,000 words. So if you wanted to prompt it, you could give it, my last book is 60,000 words. You could literally just feed it my book and then ask it questions about my book. When we wrote that book in spring of 22, when we finished it, you couldn't do summarization of a chapter. We tried to find technology to summarize a single chapter of 6,000 words. You couldn't do it. And now it's like, pick your language model and summarize your chapters. Heck, summarize your whole book. So Claude 2 is pretty cool. And then Inflection Pi is the other one that's fascinating to me, just pi.ai. It's a conversational language model that is meant to be more personal assistant and therapist and advisor. And so if I'm new to this space, I would play with those tools. Don't just stick to GPT-4, ChatGPT. Like, experiment with Bard, experiment with these other tools. They're fascinating.
One of the most fascinating ways to experiment with it, and I did this with Claude recently, was to put in a work product. I think it was probably about 500 words that I created, and I just prompted, make this better. Pasted it. 15 seconds later, it gave me something that was better. It was built on what I did, but it was a reasonably good, hyper fast editor, and it was extraordinarily impressive.
It's very impressive tech.
Cal?
So I'll go with two. One organization most would know in the data science world, Hugging Face. They're becoming the leading champion of open source in this wave of foundation models, which encompass large language models. And then the second thing that I'm really excited about is we've talked a lot about governance and risk. And the Responsible AI Institute is emerging as a think tank and thought leader, and they're connecting the different entities, enterprises with government, with nonprofit and standards organizations like NIST, and trying to create some semblance of connectivity and communication when there's just pure chaos right now.
Terrific. Gary?
Yeah. plus one to both what Paul and Cal were just advocating for as well. And I think it's important for organizations, not necessarily individuals, to look at the pros and cons of OpenAI versus Google versus Anthropic. There's different cost benefits to each of those systems. I've been really impressed with the stability of Anthropic. Actually, that's what's stood out to me. You can use LangChain and things like that to get additional prompts into some of the other places if you need to. For me, I don't think we're there yet to like really change my workflows or the way in which I conduct business. But I use Otter and Phantom, basically their transcriptions and meeting management resources, so I can focus on the meeting and make sure at the end of it I've got really consolidated notes and good next steps, and it saves a lot of that follow-up, which often got lost in the shuffle. And anyone who's in business knows that kind of when you have those meetings, you have really good conversations, the follow-up and the throughput is really hard to manage for everyone. And this has certainly changed or increased the percentage of time when those next steps are followed up, and then you get the right business value at the end of the day.
Okay, everyone, we'll end with one grossly unfair question here. Please give us one prediction for the next year.
I don't want to end on a negative note, but I think we're going to lose millions of knowledge work jobs in the next 12 to 18 months. I think the SaaS industry is going to slice another 10% or so out of their base, because they're going to be the first ones to adopt the tools for efficiency purposes and not productivity gains necessarily. There's just so much pressure on a lot of these companies. They can't get more funding until they get to profitability or at least trend toward it. So between the dramatic push for efficiency and profitability in SaaS and the ability of these tools to do some of the customer support, BDR, like some of those areas where it's just a natural thing where it's value add, I think we're see it. And then professional services is another one. I think there's going to be massive pressure on service firms, especially ones that charge hourly rates, to evolve their models. And so I don't want it to happen. I'm not cheerleading for any of this to happen, but I'm trying to be the realistic voice of if we don't want this to occur, we have to move in the same direction to preserve these jobs and find ways to upskill and reskill these people, because the machines are going to be able to do large portions of some of these roles. Not replacing jobs entirely. It's just, do we need as many humans doing the job? So yeah, that's my, I don't know if it's a prediction, it's my fear, certainly, that I think knowledge work could be disrupted pretty significantly in the next 2 years.
I'm cautiously optimistic, and Paul and I discuss this often, but without elaborating more on that point, my one prediction is we're going to see the very first set of laws emerge
in the U.S.
In Europe first,
okay.
And very likely in states, not at the national level yet, but at the state level, there's certainly a lot of activity in proposed bills. But we're going to see the very first forms of global regulation around appropriate use, around copyright, potentially around workforce protections, although I'm less optimistic on that front. But I do predict within a year, we're going to start to see this emerge, and it's going to shift the conversation.
Gary, bring us home.
Yeah. My answer is somewhat along the same lines as Paul's, but maybe a slightly different spin on it, which is I do think what I'm seeing in my industry and across other adjacent, but even beyond that industry, is this convergence of what is possible. And I think the result of that is going to be redundancy within a lot of competitive companies, and you're going to see winners and losers emerge. And I think we're going to see a much shorter list of companies in the near future. But I think the companies that win are actually going to absorb a lot of the companies that don't, and we'll see how the M&A landscape and things like that evolve over the next year or so. But I think we're going to see a massive shift in the landscape of businesses across the U.S. and globally.
That is great. And I'll just wrap up by saying that, Paul, at your conference, one of the more interesting comments from the main stage was that if you haven't lost at least 3 nights of sleep thinking about the future and the impact of AI, you're probably not paying enough attention. I've certainly lost 3+ nights of sleep, and I think there's a lot more attention that we all need to pay. We'll be buckled up for this conversation, and I want to thank you for being part of it. Paul, Cal, and Gary, And special thanks to our sponsor, the Center for Health Affairs. We appreciate the support to put on an event like this and look forward to bringing you another one soon. Thanks very much.